Okay, so now that we've got our asset in place, in this video I'd like to go ahead and get all the display related parameters for our asset created. So I'm going to bring up the type properties for our asset. Over on the parameters tab, I'm going to create a new folder for all of the parameters for our goblin asset, and I'll create this as the goblin folder. And then inside here I'm going to create an integer parameter which is going to be for our control level of detail. So control LOD, give that the label control LOD. I'm going to give this a range of 1 through to 4 locked. Now, to give you an idea of what I'm thinking in terms of our level of detail of controls, we're set to a value of 1. I'm thinking only the master control will be visible. Then when set to a value of 2, we're going to bring in the foot controls, and that's just the main foot control, not those roll controls or the knee twist. We'll bring in the hip control, the shoulder controls but not the positional shoulder controls, the head controls but not the eyes, our arm FK controls, and our super wrist control. On a level of detail of 3, we'll then bring in the foot roll, the knee twist, our spine controls, the shoulder position controls, the arm twist controls, and our eyes. And then finally, on a level of detail of 4, we'll bring in the belly control. Also, we'll have our hand controls set up so that at a level of detail of 4, they're actually on level 3. Then working back from there, on a level of detail of 3, they are on 2. On a level of detail of 2, they are on 1. And at a level of detail of 1, of course, they are turned off. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of the level of detail parameter. Now, whilst we're here, I'm going to create another parameter we're actually going to use later on, but since this is going to exist outside of any subfolders, I'll create it now, and that is the overall stretchy lock parameter, which I'm going to give the label overall stretchiness. This is going to be used as an overall ability to lock everything on our asset from being stretchy, or enable everything on our asset if then the local stretchiness for those components are indeed turned on. So this will, if we set this to 0, allow nothing to be stretchy. If it's set to 1, then it's going to allow things to be stretchy based on whether their parameters for stretchiness have been set to allow them to be stretchy. So I'm going to give this a range of 0 through to 1. So if I accept this and OK through that message, we can then jump inside our character and let's work through our controls, setting up the various different references to that level of detail. Now, our master control comes on at a level of detail of 1. That means it's going to be on permanently, so we don't need to worry about getting that set up. We know that we want our hand controls at level of detail of 2 to have a value of 1. Then at a level of detail of 3, they want to have a value of 2. And then at a level of detail of 4, they want a value of 3. So let's go ahead and set on the super wrist controls that finger LOD parameter to have a control, to reference that control level of detail parameter -1, so they're offset by 1 there. So I'm going to find the super wrist control for our left hand and the super wrist control for our right hand, and set that finger controls LOD equal to, if we go up and reference on our asset the control LOD parameter, and we want to take 1 away from that control level of detail parameter. Thus, if we now take a look at what that's going to leave us with, we can bring up the parameters, and we can see that with our control level of detail of 1, we indeed have no controls. Then as we start increasing this, you're going to see the controls coming into the view level by level. So as we start increasing that, they're going to come in level by level. Fantastic. So let's start working through our controls. We said at a control level of detail of 2, we want to bring in the foot controls. That's going to be these overall foot controls and not the sub controls. So let's hunt down the foot controls. And I'm going to jump over to the render tab, turn on display. I'm going to set the expression in their display to reference that control level of detail parameter. And I want to say, if this is greater than or equal to 2, that means we are going to have these visible. So on a level of detail of 1, they are not visible. Then at 2, since 2 is greater than or equal to 2, we're going to see them. Then obviously for all the other levels of detail, we'll see those controls as well. I'm going to copy that expression because we're going to need it on some of our other controls. So on the hip control, we want to use the same expression. So let's find our hip control and paste that into the display expression. On our shoulder controls, for the overall shoulder controls, attached and detached, we want that expression. So there are both our shoulder controls we can grab, and let's take a look. Now they've already got an expression in, so what we can do, we want to use this expression to control their visibility, but we also want to use our other expression to control their visibility. If we put the expression in brackets just to make things nice and clear, and then we say and put in another condition, that means we're going to take the result of this, and if this is true and this is true, then they'll be visible. But if this is false or this is false, then it's going to equate to false, and that's going to cause our control to not be visible, which means it will, if we deselect, that didn't seem to take, didn't look like I actually applied that. Let's bring that back up and try that again. So we want to see if that is the case. Let's accept that. There we go, that has now disappeared. So we have the control is disappeared because of the fact that the second part of this expression equated to false. Since that's false, doesn't matter if this is true or false, it's going to equate to false. We can then bring up the parameters, and if we set our control level of detail to 2, that control is going to come in because both the visibility based on our blend and now the control level of detail is true. So because both of those are true, that's going to equate to true because we need both parts either side of an and to be true for the result to be true, and now our control is visible. Let's do the same on our other shoulder control. So I'm going to put that in parentheses and that with the expression for our control level of detail and accept. I will go ahead and drop that back down to a value of 1 so we can see controls start disappearing, so we know which controls we've worked on and which controls we haven't. I do want to set up the head controls but not the eye controls to work like that as well. So let's hunt down our head controls. Bring up their display and an expression, put that inside brackets and that in with our control level of detail expression, accept. Do the same on our other head control. So that's for both of the head controls, but we're not worrying about the eye controls right now. I also want to apply it to our arm FK controls. That's the 2 rotational controls for our arm FK. So I'm going to hunt down both of the FK controls on our left arm. That's the upper arm FK control and the lower arm FK control. And both of the FK controls on our right arm. That's the upper arm and lower arm FK control. And set their display expression to equal that control level of detail greater than or equal to 2. And I also, on this case, for level of detail 2, want to set our super wrist control display equal to that expression where we're seeing if it's greater than or equal to 2. So I'm going to grab our super wrist control, and I'm going to grab the left super wrist control as well. And on the subnet tab, we have that display parameter. We can set that as well. So now, if we're to bring up our parameters for the Goblin character asset, we can see with a control level of detail of 1, the master control is visible apart from obviously the controls we haven't yet specified. When we switch to 2, a load of other controls become visible. Then as we go to 3 and 4, our hands are currently bringing in those controls, but we'll start bringing in other controls as well. So that's control level of detail 2. Let's set up control level of detail 3, where I want the foot rolls and the knee twist to come in, our 3 spine controls to come in, the shoulder position controls, the arm twist controls, and then finally the eye controls, all to come in with a control level of detail of 3. So let's start off with those foot controls. So I'm going to hunt down the foot controls, and I want to grab the toe roll, ball roll, and leg twist for the left, toe roll, ball roll, and leg twist for the right. In their render parameter, I'm going to set their display to that expression as well. Let's go ahead, bring up our parameters and set that back down to 1, so you can see they now disappear. I also want to set that on our spine controls, so I'm going to hunt down our 3 spine controls. So let's hunt down spine control 1, 2, and 3, set their display to that expression as well. And I set that actually equal to 2, I wanted that equal to 3, so I'm going to set theirs equal to 3. I'm also going to go back and adapt the foot controls so that they're equal to 3 as well, since I didn't want those equal to 2. So I can grab the 6 nose dealing with the roll controls and our knee twist, and if I bring up their expression and make sure that is indeed greater than or equal to 3, and then copy that expression for setting on the other nodes. So we want to see if they're greater than or equal to 3. We've also got those shoulder position controls, the arm twist controls, and the eyes to deal with. So we'll hunt down the shoulder position controls. That's going to be our right shoulder position. While we're there, let's grab our right arm twist control. I also want our left shoulder position and our left arm twist control. Again, set the display flag to is that control level of detail greater than or equal to 3. We finally have the eyes controls to set up for level of detail 3. This is going to be very similar to the way that we set up our other attached and detached controls because of the fact that we have an expression already on their visibility. So I'm going to grab all of the controls that I know have the same expression already for their display, bring up their expression in the expression editor, put that inside parentheses, and that with our control level of detail 3 expression and accept. I'm going to do the same for the detached controls, knowing that they all have the same expression. Grab all of those, bring up their expression in the expression editor, and that with that control level of detail greater than or equal to 3 expression and accept. So all that's left to set up now is level of detail 4 on our belly control. So let's find the belly control and set that to have control level of detail greater than or equal to 4. So if we back off from our character, there we go, and bring up the parameters for our asset, with a control level of detail of 1 we have just the master control. As we go to level 2, we have some generic overall control. We have overall control of the legs, some FK control and IK control of our arms, overall control of the wrist and our hand, and obviously overall control of the hips, shoulders and head. Level of detail 3 brings in some of the more subtle controls, control over rolling the foot, control over twisting the knee, control over twisting the arm, as well as the shoulder controls, add subtle spine controls and the eye controls, and also brings in more detail for the hands. And then control level of detail 4 brings in full detail for the hands. So setting up that control level of detail really was as simple as going in and making sure that we check to see is that value, that parameter, greater than or equal to whichever level we want those controls to come alive and activate on. So that's why, we just go through very quickly and set those up, because it is the same thing over and over again, just with different values. And the only thing that really changed there was when we were dealing with controls that already have an expression. We're going to see that again in a second, because we're going to set up some toggles now to control different visibility of controls. If we want to have multiple expressions that all of them have to be true for this control to be visible, we can put them inside parentheses just to keep things nice and clean, and make sure by ampersanding them together, by anding them together, that we can make sure that everything has to be true for this to equate to true. If any of the arguments equate to false, then this will equate to false. So I'm going to accept that. We've now set up our control level of detail. I do want to set up some toggles that allow us to toggle the display of various components in our rig. So let's bring up the type properties for our asset. And I'm going to create a new folder underneath our goblin. And this is going to be the display folder. Now you may ask yourself why I haven't put the control level of detail parameter in the display folder. The reason for that, you may want to grab the control level of detail at any time when working with the asset. This means that this parameter will always be available. It will always be at the top of the asset's parameters. Inside the display folder are going to be things that really are not so likely to work with. Turning off the visibility of the geometry, turning off visibility of our bones, and turning off visibility of groups of controls. You're likely to do less often necessarily than changing control level of detail, which you may do quite frequently. So that's why I wanted to keep that out of that folder, so you don't have to switch folders when working with that parameter. So let's create a number of different toggle parameters under the display folder, I want to create a bone viz parameter, which is going to control our bones visibility. Let's create a new toggle. I want to create a skeleton viz parameter, which will control our skeleton geometry. I also want to create a goblin viz parameter, which will control our goblin geometry. Then I'm going to create a subfolder of the display folder called controls. And inside our controls, I'm going to create a number of toggles to control various regions and various different components of our rig. So I'm going to start out with a toggle for our master control visibility. So that will control just the master control. We'll also create a toggle for our hip controls. So hip control viz for hip controls. We're going to have a spine controls visibility, and that's going to be for the 3 spine controls and also for our belly controls. This is going to be a spine controls viz for our spine controls. I'm also going to create a shoulder controls viz, which is going to be for our overall shoulder controls, both attached and detached, and those 2 shoulder position controls. So controls. Let's create a head controls viz, which will be for all of the head controls, including the eyes. Let's create controls now for our legs and arms, and I'm actually going to separate these into left leg, left arm, and right arm, and that will be all the toggles that we have. You'll notice that once we have our legs and arms in place, that will accommodate the entire rig. So I'm going to create a L leg controls viz for our left leg controls. I'm going to right click and copy that, right click and paste, and create a R leg controls viz for our right leg controls. I'm going to grab both of those, right click and copy, right click and paste, and create a L arm controls viz for our left arm controls, and also an R arm controls viz for our right arm controls. Fantastic. So if we accept this and OK through the warnings about our fetch objects, we now need to go through our asset and link up the various controls. And I'm going to do this by referencing that parameter, and if that parameter is checked, then that will be a value of true. If it's not checked, it will be a value of false. I'm going to AND that in with our existing expression. So after you've seen the first couple of these, you should be fairly comfortable to go through the rest of what I'm going to set up on this video. All I'm planning to set up from this point is those toggles. I'm going to go through, and then anywhere where we already have an expression in place, I'll AND those in with our existing expression, and then on anywhere else I'm going to be, say on our bones, it would just be the only expression on there. The only place where that's going to be different is going to be on our super risk control, where instead of ANDing them together, which will either give us a true or false, since we're dealing with needing to know the number on our super risk control, and I say super risk control, I mean for the finger level of detail as opposed to its visibility itself. Instead of needing a true or false value there, I need either a number or a 0. So I'm actually going to multiply the left arm controls visibility on our left set of finger control level of detail in with our existing expression, so that if we have a toggle turned on, we'll get whatever the number was originally. As soon as that toggle gets turned off, we multiply by a value of 0, that will always give us 0. Other than that, we're going to use the same approach that we've used before, so do feel free to go ahead, do this on your own and fast forward through the video if you need to. That was the only place where anything was going to be different. So I'm just going to go through and get all of these set up, but it's going to be pretty much the same thing over and over again. So let's start off with our bones. So I'm going to expand our network editor, and I'm going to grab all of the bones that have the display flag turned on. So that's all of the bones that we want the animator to see. I'm just going to go through and grab all of these bones. And again, I'm just grabbing the bones that have their display flag checked. So I'm going to skip our lower arm clone. I'm going to skip the lower arm. Let's grab our upper arm and clavicle. Let's go ahead and repeat that on our right hand side of the rig. So grab all of the bones. and again upper arm and ulnar bones, radius bones, our clavicle. Then working from the head down, our head, neck, spine, including the belly, then down our legs. With all of our bones selected, let's go ahead and jump over to their parameters, onto their render tab, turn on display, and I'm going to reference that bone viz parameter. That means that when the toggle is on, our bones will be visible, but if we bring up the parameters for our asset and turn off bones, the bones are going to disappear. So they're visible with it checked and invisible with it unchecked. Fantastic. Let's hunt down the geometry for our goblin and our skeleton. And I'm going to turn on their display flags and then control their visibility through the use of those toggle parameters. So the display flag on our goblin, I'm going to, or rather the display parameter on our goblin, I'm going to link up to that goblin viz parameter. And the display parameter on our skeleton, I'm going to link up to the skeleton viz parameter. That means if we now jump in, bring up the parameters for our goblin asset, we can turn off bones, we can turn off our goblin, and we can turn off our skeleton all independently, depending on what we want to be working with at the current time. Fantastic. So now we just need to go through and set up our controls. So starting with the master control, the display of the master control is going to be that master control viz. Fantastic. So we can now turn off the master control. The hip control is going to be, if we hunt down the hip control, that's going to be its existing expression inside brackets ANDed with that hip control viz parameter. So if we accept that, and that looked like I didn't quite find that parameter correctly, so let's take a look. That's because I have a bracing error there. There we go. If we accept that, so now if I bring up our parameters and turn off our hip control, that's going to be controlling our hip control. And of course, all of these do work in conjunction with our level of detail controls. So let's set up our spine controls for those 3 spine controls and the belly control. So I'm going to grab our belly control, and that has a control level of detail of greater than or equal to 4. We can put that in parentheses and add that in with that spine controls viz parameter and accept that. And that didn't quite find that, so why was that? Possibly because that parameter wasn't quite referenced properly. So I'm going to hunt down and see what we did name that parameter, if indeed I did name that spine. And I didn't have an E on the end of spine controls viz, so let's adapt that to spine without the E and accept. Bring up the type properties for our asset, hunt down spine controls and add an E on the end and accept. Okay. Fantastic. So now spine controls will, there we go, spine controls controls the belly control. Let's also set up our spine controls, which we know currently all have the same display, so I can grab all of those together and add that with our spine controls viz and accept. Bring up our parameters again and now turn off all of our spine controls. Fantastic. So now let's get our shoulder controls working. So the shoulder controls are going to be the positional shoulder controls and our attached and detached shoulder controls. So I'm going to grab the attached and detached shoulder controls. We're going to have to do these one at a time because they do have unique values based on the blend reference that they're using. I'm going to jump to the end and ampersand that in with our shoulder controls viz, and I will copy this since it's going to be the same on all of our other nodes for our shoulder controls. So shoulder controls viz, if we accept that, fantastic. Do the same on the detached controls, so bring this up, jump to the end, paste that in and accept. And also do the same on those positional shoulder controls as well. So I'm going to grab the L underscore shoulder position control, the R underscore shoulder position control, bring up their expressions, put them in parentheses, and ampersands that in with that parameter that we had copied. So if I accept that, bring up our parameters, turn off shoulder controls, that's going to kill out the shoulder controls. Our head control is going to be the head control itself and our controls for the eyes. Now this brings up an interesting point. We don't really have controls for those eyes that are representations of our eyes. I'm going to say that they really need to be linked in with our bones. So when we come to hunt down those, I'm actually going to link that in to the bone viz parameter. So let's hunt down our head controls. So I'm going to hunt down our head controls, and there are those two pivots. So whilst we're here, let's link those in to that bone viz parameter. So that means they should disappear. Fantastic. Then let's go ahead and grab our head control. Again, these head controls we need to do individually because of the fact that they have unique parameters. So I want to see now if the head controls viz parameter is activated. I'm going to copy that and accept. Go ahead and jump to the end of the other head controls expression, paste that in and accept. Hunt down the eye controls that are attached to the head. We know they have the same display expression. Jump to the end, paste and accept. And that did break that expression there. And then grab our other eye controls, paste and accept. So now if I bring up our parameters, turn off head controls, all of those disappear. So we just got our legs and arms now. So for the left leg controls, let's go ahead and we're going to have to do that in 2 stages because they have different expressions currently. So our foot control needs to be done separately from the others because it has a different control level of detail. So we'll add that in with our L leg controls viz parameter. I will go ahead and copy this. Fantastic. Then grab the other 3 controls for our left leg. Bring up their expression, put that inside parentheses and paste and accept. If I bring up the parameters, turn off left leg controls, that kills those. Let's do the same for our right leg controls. So I'm going to grab our R foot control, bring that up in an expression editor, inside parentheses, paste in for our left leg, change that to an R, copy and accept. Then grab our other right controls for our right leg, put those in parentheses, paste and accept. That's going to then control all of our right leg controls when we turn those off. We've got our left arm controls. We'll have to do this in a number of stages. So let me grab the FK controls, bring that up, and ampersand that in with our L arm controls viz, and copy that. Control C and accept. So that's our FK controls. We need to do our twist control. So there's the twist control. Bring that up in an expression editor and accept. We need to do the super wrist control. So let's hunt down our super wrist control, bring up its display parameter, in parentheses, paste and accept. We also need to affect on the super wrist control, and this is the only part again that was different really than the other approach. Our finger control level of detail currently is a number. We know when that number reaches 0 that we don't have any controls. So if I multiply that in by, instead of anding with our left arm controls viz, when this is true we get whatever our control level of detail was previously. As soon as this is false we get a 0 evaluate here. So now we can turn off our left arm controls. So I just need to repeat that for the right arm controls, and then that will conclude this video. So I'm going to jump over and grab our right arm FK controls, bring up their expression, jump to the end and add that in this case with our R arm controls viz. Let's copy that and accept. I want to grab the twist control for our right arm, bring up its display expression, paste and accept. I want to grab the super wrist control. So over to our right arm. And there is our super wrist control. On the right, grab its expression, put that inside parentheses and paste and accept. And that needs another, something there broke. There's a channel evaluation error. It appears that I missed, there we go, I missed off that second parenthesis there. So we've got our super wrist control, and on that tab I also need to multiply in, instead of anding in, our arm super, or our arm viz, or our arm controls viz, multiply that in with the control level of detail. So I can bring up the parameters now, turn off our right arm, and it appears that, and indeed I actually hooked up our FK controls on the left arm instead of the right arm. So let's grab the right arm, bring that in, multiply that in, so and that in. Okay, let's grab the twist for our right arm and that in. Then let's go ahead and go back to the FK controls on our left arm. And we can simply jump in and delete out where we anded in the right arm. So I can delete that out and accept. And also on that twist control, delete out where we anded that in and accept. So now if I bring up our parameters, left arm, right leg, left leg, head controls, shoulder controls, spine controls, hip control, master control, bones including those eyes, the skeleton, our goblin, and also we have our control level of detail in play as well. So everything indeed does appear to be working. I know that's a fairly lengthy video, there's a lot of different control objects to get set up, but it was a fairly repetitive process, so hopefully after the first couple of times you got the idea and actually just went ahead and did this for yourself. So with that, that is going to conclude setting up the display parameters on our asset. Thanks a lot everyone.